The fire had almost died. Only a faint orange glow remained, flickering against the rough limestone walls of a cave in what is now southern Germany. The year was roughly 40,000 BC. Outside, the wind howled across a frozen world still recovering from the last ice age. Inside, a single man sat hunched over a small piece of hollow bone. He was alone. You can still hold that object today, a delicate flute carved from the wing bone of a griffon vulture. Its finger holes are precise. Someone spent hours, perhaps days, shaping it with stone tools. When archaeologists found it in 2008, deep in the Hohle Fels Cave, they realized something unsettling. This was one of the oldest musical instruments ever discovered. Why make music if no one else was there to hear it? The common story we tell ourselves is simple. Ancient humans were pack animals. Survival demanded the group. Loneliness was a death sentence. You stayed close to the fire, close to the tribe, close to the voices that kept the darkness at bay. But then you find that flute. And the story begins to crack. The man who carved it, let's call him Kale for the sake of feeling his weight, had likely lost his people. Maybe a sudden blizzard. Maybe a raid by another band. Maybe simple bad luck during a long hunt. In the brutal calculus of the Paleolithic, losing your group usually meant death within days. Yet he survived. Not just survived. He created. He sat in that cave, the smell of wet earth and animal fat thick in the air, his fingers numb from the cold, and he turned a dead bird's bone into a voice. A voice for when all other voices had gone silent. Archaeologists have found more than just this one flute. They've found fragments of others nearby. They've found ivory figurines, strange half-human, half-animal beings, carved with obsessive detail. These were not tools for hunting or butchering. These were objects made in solitude, for something deeper. Why? Here is where the mystery deepens. We now know that around 40,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened in the human mind. The archaeological record explodes with symbolic thinking. Cave paintings, personal ornaments, burials with grave goods. This cognitive revolution didn't just happen in big groups around campfires. Some of the most powerful expressions appear in small, hidden spaces. Deep in caves. On isolated rock shelters. Places where a person could go to be alone with their thoughts. Loneliness, it seems, wasn't just endured. It was used. Picture this. A woman, weeks after her mate and child died from sickness. The group moves on because they must. She stays behind for a few days at the burial site. The silence is crushing. The emptiness feels like it might swallow her. So she takes red ochre and presses her hand against the cave wall, blowing pigment around it, leaving her mark. We have found hundreds of these hand stencils across the world, some in places so difficult to reach that the artist almost certainly went there alone, by choice or by necessity. Why leave a handprint where almost no one would ever see it? Because being witnessed by the living wasn't enough. They needed to be witnessed by something. By the cave itself. By the spirits. By the future. By whatever could fill the terrifying void. The revelations come in layers. First layer. Ancient humans felt loneliness exactly as we do, that hollow ache in the chest, the sense that something essential is missing. Second layer. They didn't have therapy, social media, or cities full of people. They had ritual, art, and story. Third layer. The most haunting. Some of them chose moments of deliberate solitude. The shaman. The visionary. The grieving. They walked into the silence on purpose because they understood that loneliness could be a doorway. Not to happiness, but to transformation. The flute player wasn't just making noise. He was reaching across the abyss between himself and the rest of existence. He was saying, I am here. I feel this. And this feeling is so powerful it must become music. There is one final twist. When researchers played a replica of that 40,000-year-old vulture bone flute, the sound that emerged was hauntingly beautiful. Low, breathy, almost human. The kind of sound that makes the hair on your arm stand up. It sounded like longing. It sounded like every person who has ever sat alone at night wondering if anyone, anywhere, truly understands. But the story doesn't end in the Ice Age caves. The same quiet battle against emptiness echoes across time and continents. Consider the vast empty plains of what is now Australia, around 20,000 years ago. A lone hunter returns to a temporary camp after days tracking prey that never appeared. The stars stretch endlessly above him, indifferent. No voices. No worms. In that crushing isolation, he carves lines into a rock face, intricate patterns that archaeologists now recognize as some of the earliest symbolic maps. Not for navigation. For remembrance. For anchoring his mind when the world felt too big and too empty. Or travel to the deserts of the American Southwest, thousands of years later. A young woman sits beside the body of her mother, wrapped in hides under the scorching sun. The tribe has moved to find water. She cannot follow yet. Instead of despairing into nothingness, she gathers clay and shapes small figurines, tiny human forms with exaggerated bellies and breasts. Fertility symbols born from grief. Objects meant to summon life back into a world that had taken too much. Even later, in the early agricultural villages of the Near East, around 10,000 BC, we find evidence of individuals who deliberately separated themselves. Small shrines built slightly apart from the main settlement. Inside, carefully placed beads, polished stones, and traces of burned herbs. These were not communal temples. They were personal sanctuaries, places where people went to sit with their loneliness and negotiate with it through ritual. The pattern repeats with haunting consistency. Loneliness did not paralyze our ancestors. It catalyzed something profound. It forced them to invent meaning when the group could no longer provide it. The flute, the handprint, the figurine, the shrine, all were bridges built across the void. And here lies perhaps the deepest revelation. What we call mental health today was, for them, a spiritual technology. They understood that the pain of separation from others could open a door to connection with something greater. Ancestors, spirits, the land itself, or simply the future listener who might one day find their mark. In our modern world of constant connection, we pathologize the very feeling that once forged our humanity. We scroll to escape it. We medicate it. We fear it. But our ancestors leaned in. They breathed into the hollow bone. They pressed their hands against cold stone. They shaped clay with trembling fingers. So how did ancient humans handle loneliness? They turned it into art. They turned it into ritual. They turned it into music that could survive for 40,000 years. They turned it into maps, into gods, into stories whispered to the wind. They understood something we often forget in our crowded, noisy world. The deepest parts of being human are often forged not in the warmth of the group, but in the cold silence when the group is gone. And in that silence, they reached for something larger than themselves. The flute still exists. You can see it in a museum. Hold it in your mind for a moment. A small piece of bone. A man's breath from 40,000 years ago. A sound made for no one, and yet for all of us. What does that tell you about the loneliness you feel today? Perhaps we are not broken for feeling it. Perhaps we are simply continuing a very, very old human tradition, the tradition of turning our deepest emptiness into something that sings. And maybe, just maybe, the next time the silence feels too heavy, we might pick up our own version of that ancient flute, a pen, a brush, a prayer, a quiet walk, and let it carry our voice across the darkness.